Good evening, everyone. On behalf of AFPI Karnataka chapter, we welcome you all for probably a very interactive session on adult vaccination. And I'm sure a lot of participants are coming in because they would also want to hear about COVID vaccine as well, which is one of the topics which will be taken up in the later part of this discussion. And it's a privilege for me to introduce one of our most elegant for the day, that is Dr. Swapna Bhaskar. She needs no introduction, I can say. And I'm a village student. And today, if I can, or probably able to head the academic wing of AFPI Karnataka chapter, is definitely because of her efforts in nurturing me and many more students who have been nurtured very well under her guidance. And Dr. Swapna Bhaskar, she heads the Department of Family Medicine for those of you who don't know about her, in St. Philomena's Hospital, Bengaluru, Karnataka. And she is the founder member of Primary Health Family Medicine Clinic, and she's our beloved president more than anything else since a year, and one of the most approachable persons in our executive committee member, and as an executive committee member. And she is also a mentor of lot of postgraduates in family medicine who have come up like me. And she's also a resource person to national board, and she's also an examiner for family medicine. Her area of interest being management of lifestyle diseases, tuberculosis, and adult vaccination as well. So over to you, Dr. Ma'am. Would love to hear and learn lots from you regarding vaccination in adults. Thank you.
Thank you, Soumya. I think that introduction was too sweet. Thanks a lot. So, once again, a warm welcome from all of us in Team AFPI Karnataka to all those who joined. This topic, adult vaccination, I think was a little offbeat, probably till maybe a month or so, or 2 months or so back. But now I would say everybody is suddenly enlightened about vaccinating each other, adults or elders, more than the children now. Vaccination and the word used to always come, only children come in our mind the moment we say vaccination. But suddenly, over the last few months, I would say vaccination has become more the topic of discussion among adults than children. So, thanks to COVID, of course. Okay, so this just wanted to start off by sharing this, cartoon set where vaccines were initially, people were praying for some vaccine to come, and then some vaccines started coming. People started having a lot of hopes. Vaccine people who were running away from vaccine suddenly started thinking, "Okay, we need to get the vaccine. I need to somehow go and get it at the earliest." And I'm sure, hopefully, in the next month or so, there will be a lot of demand for this. Newfound superhero, I will say, the much awaited superhero of 2021. So, without wasting any time, I'll go to the objectives of my talk in the next, say, 40-45 minutes. It's more, I would say, a shared learning rather. I wouldn't claim myself to be an expert in adult vaccination. I would really love to share my knowledge and also hear from all of you about your thoughts. Do adults actually need vaccines? And what is the difference between adult and pediatric vaccines in terms of logistics and science? Some do's and don'ts, some contraindications specifically, generally for all the vaccines and specific for few vaccines. Are there any guidelines? Basically, two main guidelines, that is AICP, CDC, and API. I will also be talking about some individual vaccines, whichever I think is relevant. Maybe I will not go to all of them. Some special scenarios, and of course, this talk will never be complete without this talking about this new hero, as I told, COVID-19 vaccine. So, a last few minutes will be spent on the COVID-19 vaccines. So the first question, do adults need vaccine? I think as of now, I mean, previously also, as of now also, it's an overwhelming yes. The reasons, a few of them I have put here. There is an increase in the vaccine, I mean, in the prevalence of vaccine preventable diseases, dengue, HIV, COVID being added to it. There is also emergence of HIV and other immunocompromised conditions like diabetes. And India being the diabetes capital of the world, we have much more number of people whom we have to think of as immunocompromised. Other things like, malignancies, other immunocompromised conditions. The third thing, new viruses and resistant organisms. Again, here I think there's no better example than what we've been going through in the last 1 year. MARS, SARS, all these were unheard of probably about 20, 25 years back when I was doing my undergraduation. So a lot of new viruses, new organisms coming up. The last three, I feel, is also very important. There is a lot of travel and globalization, which makes people move from one country to another, one place to another, and there is an increase in geriatric population. So we have a more number of I mean, since the life expectancy has increased, we have more number of vulnerable population also in terms of immunocompromised states and geriatric population. So now we know that we need to give adults vaccine. But what are the challenges that we face when you want to vaccinate? If you see, there are not much of reliable data on communicable diseases and also the adequacy of immunization among adults. There are a lot of papers on pediatric vaccines. There are a lot of, all countries, almost all the countries follow a strict norm in pediatric vaccination. Whereas if you look at even CDC or WHO or even developed countries like US, UK also, you see that there's not much of data on adult vaccination. Is there a good data on infectious disease, especially in India? Though it is very difficult to get a good robust data on the the actual communicable diseases or vaccine preventable diseases, what I would call. Healthcare providers as well as the beneficiaries, they also don't seem to have much knowledge and perception about the vaccines that can be taken or the vaccines that can be given to their patients. There's a lot of doubt on the efficacy and safety of vaccines. I think one adverse event and the whole poor vaccine is being so criminalized, like, this vaccine has got this side effect. So at least in pediatrics, there's not much of side effects which has been portrayed so badly, but in adults, they kind of doubt on the safety of most of the vaccines which come out. So is it actually going to be helpful for adults, just like in pediatrics? Even that comes. The last three, I think, are the most important, according to me, which comes as challenges to adult immunization. There is no universal program in many of the countries, including India. Pediatric vaccinations are very well sketched out. They have proper funding from the government. There is definite, scheduled program. Everything is there. Whereas when it comes to adult vaccinations, many countries, including India, has no universal program and no financing for vaccinating adults. Moreover, unlike in pediatrics, the vaccine is very different for each target group. So you take women, there is a different set. In men, there is if you have patients with comorbid illness, non-comorbid healthy patients. So a lot of targets which you have to look at before you vaccinate a person. And the last but not least, healthy adults are very busy and difficult to catch, and there's a lot of hesitation also among healthy adults to take vaccine. So, as an example, if I offer HPV vaccine to a mother and daughter who comes to my clinic, they very clearly say, please go ahead and vaccinate my daughter with the best possible vaccine that you can, if there is a vaccine against cancer. And I say, ma'am, you should also be taking. Then you can see that hesitancy. I'll see, I will. Maybe it's like money or the attitude. So there's a lot of hesitancy among adults when you offer the vaccine. And also maybe this feeling of, I'm immune to certain things, I'm healthy, I probably don't need, unlike a child. So these three are the most important of the hindrances or the challenges that you face when you have to offer adults vaccine. I would like to just request all of you that we will be sharing a link here, which will come on your chat box. Dr. Soumya or Dr. Jyotika will share the link. It will just take 2 minutes of your time. please go through the link and just fill up that form with just 2 minutes time. As I keep looking through the next slide, I would really be happy if all of you can share your responses. Soumya, is it shared?
Just in a minute.
So meanwhile, I'll just go to the next slide instead of wasting time. So all of you, please go through the link when Soumya shares that. So now we have seen the logistical issues in or challenges for adult vaccination. Let's see what is the challenges that we face. In children, it's just age, particular age, particular vaccine, and there is a standard dosage schedule. Whereas when to adults, it's not just age, there is also your prior history of vaccination, whether the person has been vaccinated as a child, whether the person
Sorry to interrupt, ma'am. The link has been shared in the chat box.
Okay.
So all of you can
Just we need some time to
that
fill
link.
it.
Yeah.
I will finish this slide. And then
5 minutes.
I hope all of you have received the link in the chat box. Oh, it says they can't find the link. Jo and Soumya?
It is there in the chat box.
No, everybody says no, we didn't get it. So I think everybody has told no. So I think that is probably you need to just resend it once again.
Just scroll up, it's there. Just scroll up.
Yeah, it is there because we just checked and we are filling it.
Yeah.
Just resend it because actually even I am not able to see the link. So maybe I think some people would have got, some wouldn't have got. Just reshare it.
Can you see it now? I posted it just now.
Yeah, started getting some responses. Yeah, please go ahead.
Can you see it now? Okay.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead by the time. Please take your time, a minute or two, and then okay. So yeah, so as I was talking, the the medical difficulties that you face when you vaccinate adults, apart from the age, you have to look at the prior vaccination record. You should look at the health condition of the patient, whether the patient is a vulnerable patient, whether the patient is having diabetes or chronic heart disease, chronic renal disease, liver conditions. So all those are important. The lifestyle of the patient, where is the patient living? Is it in a crowded place? Is it in a hostel, or is it like with elderly or with immunocompromised patients? So lifestyle of the patient, occupation, healthcare workers definitely come on top of that in occupation list. And also travel. Is the patient traveling to an endemic area, or is the patient traveling to a place where he's susceptible to get the infections? So according to all these, there is varying dosage schedule, unlike in pediatrics where you just have to follow one dosage schedule. This is just to let you know what is the normal time taken to develop a vaccine. So the minimum time, as far as I remember, for measles or something was around 4.5 or 5 or 6 years to almost 20-25 years. There are vaccines like varicella which took almost 25 years to develop, going through this phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and coming to us adults with the tag of being safe enough. So with this in mind, we should understand how much effort and time goes into developing any vaccine for that matter. Okay. Now, looking before I come to vaccine, schedules and guidelines, this is just to give you an idea on what are the types of vaccines that we get, because I'll be using these words a lot throughout the next coming slides. So vaccines are usually of 4 types: live, inactivated, toxoid, and subunit. Subunit, again, based on what part of the organism is taken. It can be protein based, it can be polysaccharide based, or it can be a conjugate where there's different combinations of different components. Looking at the immune response, live vaccines usually have very good immune response. Live vaccines are those where the virus or the organism is subcultured in a different medium like chick embryo or human cell, etc. And it's weakened in such a way that it doesn't cause the infection. but the antigenicity is good enough to provide antibodies in the body. But it comes with the catch that it can mutate and it can cause disease process in the mutation process. Hence, it cannot be used in immunocompromised. It cannot be used in even pregnant or even people living with severely immunocompromised. So that is the disadvantage of giving a live vaccine. All the others are weaker in the immunogenicity. Conjugate vaccines are stronger compared to the other two recombinant and the polysaccharide, but they don't have chances of causing a disease, so they can be safely used in pregnant or immunocompromised people. There are two other words which all of us should be aware of. One is the efficacy of the vaccine. Not every vaccine is 100% efficacious. So when we give vaccine to a patient, let it be adult or pediatrics, we should be explaining to them that giving the vaccine is not, feeling that I'm 100% protected. So there is always the efficacy ranges from anything like even 50, 60% to as high as maybe 90% or 92 or 98%. So, and each vaccine, it is different. Also, the seroconversion time, that is the time taken for the antibodies to be good enough to fight the disease. So some vaccines, just one dose is enough, whereas some vaccine you need 2 or 3 or multiple doses for actually good seroconversion that should be coming. So we should be aware of all this before we advise or when we start advising vaccines. So some general instructions, this holds good for all the adult vaccines. Always weigh the benefit versus the risk. So if you feel risk is more, please don't advocate the vaccine. So it's always better to make a shared decision, discuss the pros and cons, and then take the decision in concurrence with your patient's decision also. Almost all the adult vaccines are given only in the deltoid. Every vaccinated person should be observed for at least 15 minutes to 30 minutes. In COVID vaccine, they say 30 minutes now apparently, to look for any anaphylactic shock or any immediate adverse effect. Most vaccines can be given on the same day at different sites. If at all you don't give 2 vaccines on the same day, if it is a live vaccine to a live vaccine, we should keep a gap of at least 4 weeks, whereas there is no need to keep any gap between live and inactive vaccines or 2 inactive vaccines. If you're giving immunoglobulins with live vaccines, again, there should be a gap of 2 weeks after giving immunoglobulin to live vaccine. Whereas for inactive vaccines, it can be given simultaneously on the same day, again in 2 different sites. Always choose different sites when you give vaccines. Similarly, contraindications in general to all the vaccines. When a person has a moderate or severe acute illness, it is better not to give any vaccine. Severely immunocompromised people, so patients who are HIV positive with CD4 of less than 200, people who have, other severe immune, like, fungals, all those, it's better not to give any vaccines at that point of time. Any severe allergic reaction or Guillain-Barré to the previous dose. Mind you, it's only severe allergic reaction. For simple mild allergic reactions, for simple pain at the site or a mild erythematous reaction at the site, there is no contraindication to give the next dose. Previously, as I mentioned, live vaccines should not be given, not just in immunocompromised, but also in pregnant women and also caretakers of severely immunocompromised patients. So these are the general contraindications. What we consider as contraindications, but are actually not contraindications, are simple mild febrile illnesses, convalescent phase of any acute illness, and surgeries. In fact, CDC and AICP mentioned that is the best time to actually advocate the vaccine, because the patient is with you, they're more receptive, they've just come out of an infection, so they know the difficulties. And surgeries are also not a contraindication. So use that opportunity to actually advocate the vaccine when the patient is admitted in a hospital. Anybody who's on current antimicrobial therapy also you can give, for simple other reasons, can also be given adult vaccines. Breastfeeding is also not a contraindication, except in very few scenarios. I remember there's only yellow fever vaccine which is contraindicated in breastfeeding. Okay, so I hope all of you have given your responses. I'm just going through it. I've got 25 responses out of 74. I'm still not very happy. I'm hoping few more people will give some more responses. Those who haven't, please open the link and send your responses to me. I have about 25. I'll wait for some more time.
Posting it again for those who joined late. Okay. There's a Google form link in the chat box. Please do open that link and fill that form. It takes, I think, 30 to 40 seconds. Thank you.
Okay. So before I actually give more, details, I just want to show you 2, 3 scenarios, which these are actual patients. So they're not simulated patients, or they're not made up cases. So these cases actually made me take interest in adult vaccination rather, when I found out the difficulties that I was facing. So this was a 28-year-old doctor who wanted to go to UK. She had received her complete compulsory and optional vaccinations except HPV, which she hadn't taken, and did not have a BCG scar. So she was insisted to do a Manto, a quantiferon, and a chest X-ray, and all of them were normal. I think all of you will be seeing these list of tests given by foreign universities. Now the university insists that she takes a repeat BCG. So is a repeat BCG indicated or not? So keep these questions in mind. The second case was a 22-year-old healthy student who needed a vaccination completed certificate, again for higher studies in US. His vaccination records were missing. His mother says, I kind of gave him all the vaccines till 2 years, maybe till 5 years, but I'm not very sure. So the parents insist that we revaccinate the child from beginning so that we can avoid any rejection from the university where he is going to go to. So can we start revaccinating the child as if, revaccinating the adult as if it's a child, and which vaccines can be given at this age safely to this person? This was a scenario which very recently, maybe about, I think a couple of months back, just before Corona time, one of the corporate company HR team came to our hospital and wanted to vaccinate all their employees with all the possible vaccines that we can give them. So they wanted a list of appropriate vaccines and their schedules to be given to them. So which vaccines can you suggest for these kind of employees? Which vaccines can be combined and given on the same day, and what is the duration if you're not combining to give the schedule of vaccines for these adults? So I think question number 2 and 3 I've answered in the previous slide. So here I have given you 3 scenarios of healthy people who are coming to you for advice on vaccination. So which vaccines do healthy adults need? These are the guidelines that usually we can follow. Many countries have their own guidelines also. I think Australia, New Zealand and all, they have their own guidelines. I'm basically looking at 2 main guidelines, and of which the second one is what I'm going to talk on. One is the CDC ACIP guidelines, which was revised very recently in 2020. And the second one is the API guidelines. It wouldn't be called guidelines. It's rather a consensus statement or a recommendation by API in association with the medicine department of AIIMS. The first paper came out in 2008, and then they kept on revising it every 3-4 years. And the latest revision is in 2018. I think in 2021, the next, or 22 is the next revision. So this is just the ACIP CDC guidelines. I won't be talking much on this. Just all of you can access it very easily on the CDC website. This is for healthy adults, and this is for people with medical comorbidities. Okay, it's very easily accessible. So anybody who's interested, especially in the scenarios which I told in the beginning, where a person is going to UK or US, whether you need to know which vaccines are recommended by CDC, these are the 2 guidelines which I would help. I'm going to go and talk more on this guidelines, or this recommendations rather, the API recommendations for healthy adults. These are the vaccines which are recommended for healthy adults from API, which is Tdap, MMR, influenza, pneumococcal, HPV, zoster. And recently in May 2020, the JAPI also came out with a new paper which said that varicella should also be given in view of the COVID pandemic. So 1 or 2 doses of varicella has also been advocated now or recommended by API for healthy adults. Whereas in high-risk individuals, you have to give hepatitis A, B, meningococcal, varicella. Again, they have been putting it in the past. Now they just took it and added it to the needed vaccines, Hib and typhoid, and if indicated, rabies, cholera, and JE vaccine. So this is the chart where I would like to really spend some time. If you all can see my cursor. So everybody from 19 years to, I would say, any age requires 1 Tdap or TD. Always use, start off with Tdap if the patient is coming to you naive. I will be telling you individual vaccines now. Anybody below 26 years of age needs 3 doses of HPV. In fact, for the bivalent vaccine, it even goes up to 45 years now. Everybody needs 2 doses of varicella if unvaccinated. Those over 60 need 1 dose of zoster vaccine. Those below 50 need 1 or 2 doses of MMR. Those above 50 need 1 dose of influenza. And those over 65 need 1 dose of pneumococcal. All the others, hip, typhoid, and all the others in other population is indication based. So if there is an indication, you need to think of giving it. This is for people with comorbid conditions, including pregnancy and many of these comorbid conditions. Again, here, if you see TD or Tdap is not contraindicated. So everybody, irrespective of their comorbid conditions, should be offered a Tdap or TD. HPV should be not offered in pregnancy. All the others up to 26 years, or as I said, bivalent vaccine up to 45 years. Varicella zoster and MMR, as I told, they are live vaccines, so they're contraindicated in any immunocompromised conditions. All the other people you should be recommending, irrespective of their disease conditions. Influenza also, irrespective of their comorbidities, they are recommended for everybody. When it comes to pneumococcal, healthcare professionals and pregnant women should be offered if there is an indication. Hepatitis A should also be offered to anybody who has a chronic liver disease. Hepatitis A and B should be offered for anybody who has a chronic liver disease, and also those who have end-stage renal disease and healthcare professionals, plus people who have immunocompromised conditions. So this is for hepatitis B. Hepatitis A should be offered for anybody who has chronic liver disease. All the other, meningococcal and hip is offered only to those who are undergoing splenectomy or who have asplenia. So these two vaccines are currently offered only for these two people. All the others are based on indications. So this is, I would say, the gist of my talk for today. These are the recommendations which you should know. But now we need to know which vaccine among these, like say pneumococcal, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, there are different types of vaccine. If a person needs only one vaccine, what is the dose that you give? If it is two, so we will go into in-depth of each vaccine one by one now. So let's look at this one more scenario. This happened in Kerala, say about, I think, a couple of years back, where there was an outbreak of diphtheria in certain districts. So now, do the doctors, nurses, lab workers, and caregivers of patients need vaccination? If yes, what is the dosage that you're going to give? So this is a specific scenario for this particular vaccine, how to go about for this particular vaccine. So we look at these three vaccines together because the indications and contraindications all come together, Tdap and TD. I have given the trade names in blue so that people who would like to note the trade names can also take it up. As I told previously, the vaccination depends on many times on the previous vaccination status. So if you have a previously unimmunized person coming to you, you should be offering them 3 doses of Tdap or TD. Ideally, Tdap should be offered. The reason is that pertussis there are some sporadic cases of pertussis in adults also. And any immunity that you get through vaccines in childhood or through an infection in childhood is maximum known to last for about 15 to 20 years. So by the time the child is an adult of 20 years and above, we see that there is a waning of immunity from the previous vaccines given or the immunity developed by the previous infection. So Tdap should always be offered as the first shot or the first set of injections if the person is unimmunized, followed by TD booster every 10 years. If the person is vaccinated as per the schedule up to 10 years, again offer one Tdap as the first dose, followed by TD every 10 years. For the context of patients suffering from diphtheria or pertussis, so this is the scenario which I was just giving in the previous case, again offer one dose of Tdap, but only if the person has not received the vaccine in the previous 2 years. So if anybody who's been vaccinated in the past 2 years, they can be kept away from revaccination. This particular strategy of vaccination is called ring vaccination strategy, where you kind of provide a ring of immune people around the susceptible or the person who is having the infection. Women who are planning pregnancy should also be offered one Tdap if they have not received the vaccine previously. And for those, there is another vaccine strategy called as cocooning vaccine strategy, where if you have a person who cannot be given a vaccine, for example, an infant who cannot be given many vaccines, or you have a severely immunocompromised person who cannot be given vaccine, anybody who comes in close contact with that particular person, the caregivers, the doctors, the healthcare workers around them, even their grandchildren, everybody should be given this Tdap or offered the vaccine so that we are cocooning the patient from getting infection from outside or people who are in close contact with the patient. So these are the indications. Contraindications, as I told previously, plus extra contraindication is a history of encephalopathy within the past 7 days of vaccine. This is applicable to pediatrics also, where there is no other attributable cause found out. and also a history of Arthur's reaction with the previous dose. Arthur's reaction is a type 3 hypersensitivity reaction where you get vasculitis and ends up in organ damages. So if there is a history of Arthur's reaction with the previous dose, defer the vaccine for at least 10 years from the previous dose. Now, this vaccine, I think, is one of the most used or abused vaccine that we know. All of us are so fond of giving tetanus for every person who walks in with an injury. Should we actually give tetanus for every patient? Again, here it depends on the previous vaccination strategy. If you don't know the person's vaccine status, if it is a clean wound, give just one Tdap or use it to give a TD instead of giving a plain TT. If the person has not been not been vaccinated and immunocompromised, for major wounds along with the TD, give them 250 international units of immunoglobulin. Suppose the person is vaccinated previously or they've received 3 or more doses, you can give TD only if the person has not received the vaccine in the past 10 years for small wounds and for past 5 years for major wounds. So many times the TT that we offer may not be actually needed if the wound is a small, minor, clean wound. Now, the question can come, what happens if we vaccinate many times? For tetanus, usually there is nothing wrong. So many papers say that even if we over-vaccinate, there is no problem. But for some other vaccines, if we over-vaccinate, there can be a diminution in the immunogenicity of the recipient. So what we think is going to do benefit might do more harm for the patient. So before we offer vaccines, we should always be thinking of the previous vaccination status. So I hope I'm clear here as to when we can give TT for most of the wounds that we see in our day-to-day practice. Now we will go to MMR. MMR is a live vaccine. It's given as 2 doses, 28 days apart. In CDC, it mentions 2 doses, whereas in API, the recommendation is only for 1 dose because we Indians have been getting the vaccine as children. Our UPI gives 2 doses of 1 measles and 1 MMR when we were there. Now they're giving 2 to 3 doses of MMR. So usually 1 dose is enough in adults. Especially when there is an outbreak or when you want a post-exposure prophylaxis and women who are planning pregnancy, you should be offering them as a special case where you should be, I would say, more advocating this vaccine. Precautions. One is when a person has received any antibody containing blood products. So this is mostly almost all the blood products, including immunoglobulins, you should not be giving them. The reason is the recipient, the donor's blood will contain some amount of innate immunity or some amount of vaccine related immunity. So when you give the vaccine, it is again the immunogenicity of the vaccine comes down because it relates itself to the antibodies which is present in the donor's blood. So except washed red blood cells, most of the other blood products, it's better to hold on to the vaccine for at least 3 months. Some studies even say as much as 9 to 11 months, it is better not to give the MMR vaccine. MMR vaccine is also known to cause thrombocytopenia and also bring down the seizure threshold. So when a person has thrombocytopenia in reports and also a family history or personal history of seizures, be careful when you give MMR. Also, a person who is vaccinated should avoid pregnancy for the next 3 months after the vaccination with MMR. Now we will look at hepatitis A and B. Hepatitis A is an inactivated vaccine. It should be recommended for those who want protection. So you can offer it to anybody who wants to or seeks protection from hepatitis A, especially in India because you see a lot of food-related infections. But those at high risks are those who are illicit drug users and those who are requiring blood transfusions frequently like hemophiliacs, those who are awaiting or those who have received liver transplant and also those having end-stage renal disease. More so, you can offer them to food handlers and also as a post-exposure prophylaxis within 2 weeks of exposure to the patient or to the food. This vaccine has been found to be not very effective as a post-exposure prophylaxis in more than 40-year-old adults. The trade names I've given there, and it's usually given as the difference between Havrix and Vacta is basically in the soluent. The difference is that Vacta can be extrapolated to almost 18 months, in the sense the second dose can be given up to 18 months from the first dose, whereas in Havrix you have to finish it within 1 year. Ideal time is after 6 months of giving the first dose. In post-exposure prophylaxis, when you're giving in immunocompromised and CLD patients, always add immunoglobulin at a dose of 0.02 ml per kg, along with the first dose at 2 different sites. Specific contraindication to this vaccine is neomycin allergy and latex hypersensitivity. a similar vaccine, which is hepatitis B, which as healthcare professionals, we should be really knowing and also advocating to our own colleagues also. So it should be offered to all unvaccinated adults at risk and those who are seeking protection. Those at risk are, again, IV drug users, those receiving multiple transfusion, as I said, hemophiliacs, those who are in contact with chronic HBV patients, because they are always dealing with the body fluids, and in close contact with them. So they should also be offered. Anybody who's awaiting major surgeries should also be offered hepatitis B. Those who are having repeated unprotected sexual, like commercial sex workers, homosexuals, they should also be offered. And latest guidelines say all diabetics less than 60 years should also be offered the hepatitis B vaccine, because again, they come under the mild immunocompromised section of people. There are two types of vaccine with two strengths, recombinant and recombinant with adjuvant. The one with adjuvant is not very common in India. I don't think it's that easily available in India, whereas the common recombinant one, that is the 20 microgram per ml one, is the one that we commonly use at 3 doses, 0, 1, and 6 months. And for patients with CKD or immunosuppression, you should double the dose, that is 2 ml, 40 microgram of the Recombavax should be given at 4 doses, 0, 1, 2, and 6 months. As a post-exposure prophylaxis, it should always be along with immunoglobulin, 0.06 ml per kg, and followed by the full course of vaccination. Specific contraindication is hypersensitivity to yeast. So this is one vaccine where we need to look at the seroconversion, or we need to look whether the vaccine has been effective, especially in healthcare workers. So most of the vaccines, adult vaccines, they don't recommend boosters except few of them. This is one vaccine where even if you don't recommend boosters, you need to look at the anti-HBs level. So the level should be maintained above 10 MIU per ml. Suppose with 3 vaccines, the 10 MIU per ml is not obtained, we have to give a further full course of 3 more vaccines. And then the retesting should be done again after the last dose. If still there is a non-responder, you should double the dose and give 40 microgram of recombinant vaccine at the same dose of 0, 1, and 6 months. So this vaccine requires special attention in particularly whether to give booster or not based on the antibody levels generated in the particular person. Okay, so the next is meningococcal. Now I'll go into meningococcal and pneumococcal, which are similar vaccines. There are two types, polysaccharide and conjugate vaccine. Polysaccharide is again bivalent and quadrivalent based on what is there, which part of the microbe is there. The dosage is the same, 0.5 ml IM. The difference between polysaccharide and conjugate vaccines, to just put it in a nutshell, conjugate vaccines usually, as I told previously, have a better immunogenicity. So they have a faster and better immunogenicity, and they also provide herd immunity, whereas polysaccharide vaccines have a lower and little later immunogenicity, so they don't provide herd immunity also. There is also no effect on the nasopharyngeal carriage, whereas in conjugate vaccine, they also help in reduction of nasopharyngeal carriage of the microbe. But polysaccharide vaccines are not much effective in elders and in pregnancy, whereas conjugate vaccines are more effective in children. That is why if you see in CDC or in US, UK and all, meningococcal is actually part of their pediatric vaccination schedule also, although in India we have still not started giving it. Here our indication is only specific, which I will come to. But if you're giving a dose as a booster, never interchange the vaccine. So it has to be polysaccharide followed by polysaccharide or conjugate followed by conjugate. Never interchange the vaccine types. So these are the indications in India. I would just want you to concentrate on those which I have given in black, especially when people are going to African countries, those sub-Saharan belt where there is a meningitis very commonly seen. The other common indication which we see in our clinics is for those who go for Hajj pilgrims. So it should be given at least 10 days before arrival in Saudi if the person has not taken the vaccine within the last 3 years. Sometimes they say even up to 5 years you can. If the person has been vaccinated, you need not give the vaccine within the next 5 years. And also for people who need splenectomy. The other two indications during an outbreak and when there are fairs, festivals are relatively, I would say, less common where we give those. Main contraindication specific to this vaccine is for conjugate vaccine, it cannot be given for elderly. And also for DT, anybody who has allergy to a previous DT containing vaccine. This is because the adjuvant used in the vaccine is the diphtheria toxoid. So anybody who's had a reaction to the DT vaccine, you should be careful, or you should be better not advocate the meningococcal vaccine. Revaccination, as I told, after 5 years, you can offer to people who are going for Hajj pilgrims if you feel that they have a risk of reinfection. A similar vaccine is the pneumococcal vaccine. Again, two types, polysaccharide and conjugate. Schedule is 0.5 ml, 1 to 2 doses. Contraindication is first trimester of pregnancy. Again, I will say the differences between the polysaccharide and the conjugate vaccine. Apart from the immunogenicity, the polysaccharide vaccine is quite cheap compared to the conjugate vaccine. It's quite almost double the cost of conjugate. I mean, the polysaccharide vaccine for the conjugate. Just like meningococcal vaccine, efficacy is not very good for pediatric age group with polysaccharide compared to conjugate. And whereas the polysaccharide vaccine is very effective in elderly for invasive disease. So when you're thinking of elderly, it's polysaccharide, whereas when you're thinking of conjugate, it is pediatrics, it is conjugate. The disadvantage with polysaccharide vaccine is that the immunity starts declining in 3 to 5 years, whereas conjugate gives a much longer immunity. That is why conjugate is usually given in the pediatric age group. Similarly, conjugate is given in pediatric age group because it reduces the nasopharyngeal carriage. Most of these infections actually spread from children to adults through the nasopharyngeal carriage. So if we catch hold of the children and stop the nasopharyngeal carriage, it is said that herd immunity can be developed, and also the chances of the adults getting infections from children also come down. So that is why conjugate vaccines are always advised in pediatric age group. Similarly, mucosal immunity is also good with PCV13, that is the conjugate, compared to the polysaccharide vaccine. This is one of the vaccines which, if you look at the CDC or if you look at the API, it's extremely confusing. So I have just taken one part of it and given you, or I would rather want you to concentrate on just these three parts which I'm showing here. Indian guidelines always mention to give a conjugate vaccine first, because most of us adults are not vaccinated in childhood. We are talking about this generation. Maybe 10 years or 15 years later, I don't know if the guidelines can change, because then we have a lot of adults who've been vaccinated in childhood. Pneumococcal vaccine has come in Indian setup only since the last, I would say, 10 years. So most of the adults that we see now are vaccine naive. So it is always better to offer them PCV13 followed by a PPSV after 8 weeks. Again, do not co-administer both the vaccines. It should be with a gap. And if you feel that, okay, you don't want to give PPSV, you can just, if you don't want to give PCV, it is fine, you can give PPSV. But if you think that I'm going to give both, always give the conjugate vaccine before the polysaccharide vaccine, because the conjugate vaccine gives a quick seroconversion and a good antibody levels in the first initial phase, and by the time it starts waning, you can give the polysaccharide vaccine. And it also gives a good base for the body to develop antibodies when you give the polysaccharide vaccine. When it is vice versa, suppose you have a person who has taken the polysaccharide vaccine and come to you, it's better to give a gap of 1 year before you give the conjugate vaccine. So just this much, if you remember, always offer conjugate vaccine if the person can afford it. It is very expensive. It is about 3,000 rupees. So if the person can afford it, you can always offer the conjugate vaccine, and then 8 weeks later, you can follow it up with PPSV. You have enough time. You can even give up to 1 year's time and then give the next dose of the polysaccharide vaccine. One more point I want you to remember in this particular vaccine is at the age of 65, if you look at this, at the age of 65 or after the last dose being given, if 5 years have elapsed, always offer one more PPSV. That is why if you see the first guideline, we said after 65 years, it is PPSV is mandated for everybody. So if the person is less than 65 and you vaccinate, when the person turns 65 or 5 years after the previous dose of vaccine, one more dose of PPSV is mandated. So if you remember this much, I think that's good enough for us to practice as clinicians. Okay, I think too many vaccines now. Let me just see if the responses I have got. Just give me 2 minutes. I've got about 45 responses, so of which a majority are postgraduates, and maximum number of people, the experience is less than 5 years. So I'm so happy so many youngsters have joined today. More than 50% say their experience is less than 5 years. So, okay, this is a good, nice distribution among those who have taken Tdap or TD in the last 10 years. It's a 50-50 response. out of 43 responses, half of them say yes and half of them say no. So as healthcare workers, we still haven't given ourselves a TD or a Tdap. The next question of have you taken influenza vaccine in the past 1 year? It's a 55 to 45. Okay, so almost similar to Tdap. Many of us are still not taken your influenza vaccine shot. Okay, this interesting question. Will you take the COVID vaccine if it becomes available soon? Okay. Again, more than 50% of people have told that they will take it. That's very nice. Almost 55% say they will take it. Only very small, 7% said no. And the rest, 37 to 38% have told that maybe I will. Do you regularly advise vaccines for healthy adults? 60% say, only 40% say yes and 60% said no. Okay, that is a little surprising. So most of us don't actually give vaccines to adults. I mean, educate or rather advise vaccine to adults. And do you administer vaccines for adults also? It is the same response. 60% said no and only 40% said yes. Are you aware of any guidelines or policies for adult vaccination? 50% said yes, that's quite good. The rest 25 said no and maybe. And do you think cost is a factor for vaccinating adults? Again, overwhelming 55% say yes, which I also agree. At least in India, since we don't have a funding, it is important that cost factor of the vaccine be explained to the patient. So when you administer the vaccine or when you educate, you please tell them the cost factor also and take a shared decision. Thank you everyone for filling this up. It's so nice of you to help us in understand the audience. So we'll go back to the vaccines. The next one is the influenza vaccine. There are two types, inactivated and live. Both are available as trivalent and quadrivalent. These days, trivalent is kind of outdated since we have quadrivalent vaccine. I would say I have not been using trivalent vaccine until unless I really don't get the quadrivalent one. The difference between the two is that the inactive vaccine is given as IM, whereas the live one is given as intranasal. The inactive one can be given to children as less as 6 months of age, whereas live vaccine should be given only above 2 years of age and should not be given above 50 years of age. Specific contraindication to this vaccine, both the vaccines is allergic reaction to egg, whereas specifically for the live vaccine, it is asthma, anatomic or functional asplenia, CSF leak or cochlear implant, because there will be some leak into the nasal cavity. So that's why you cannot give a nasal spray there. Those who receive aspirin or salicylate should not be given the live vaccine because it can induce a Reye syndrome. So never give to those patients who are getting aspirin or salicylate containing drugs. Also, those who are taking antiviral drugs or those who have taken antiviral drugs in the past 48 hours also, you should not be giving the live vaccine because it's the antiviral will kill the viruses and the immunogenicity will be grossly decreased. So these are the specific contraindications. Now, similar vaccine, which is varicella, 2 doses at 4 to 8 weeks apart. It's a live attenuated vaccine. Strongly recommended for non-pregnant women of childbearing age whenever there is an outbreak control as a post-exposure prophylaxis within 3 to 5 days of exposure to the rashes. Specific contraindications will be hypersensitivity to gelatin and neomycin. Again, just like I mentioned in MMR, most of these viral and viral vaccines, it's better to hold on to them if the person has received blood transfusion in the past, say 3 or 5 or 6 months. The reason I explained last time. In pregnancy, since we cannot give the vaccine, what you can offer to a patient as a post-exposure prophylaxis is immunoglobulins at the dose of 125 units per 10 kg, maximum 625 units within 72 hours, up to a maximum of 10 days. Beyond 10 days, the immunoglobulin may not help much. Similar vaccine is Zostavax. The difference between Zostavax and varicella is that there is a 14 times more component of the microbe in the Zoster vaccine. So it is very expensive and it needs a lot of stringent storage conditions, protection from light. It's a single dose, 0.65 ml given as subcutaneous. Contraindication is just like in varicella vaccine, any hypersensitivity reaction to gelatin or neomycin. And it should be offered only to adults above 65 years of age. Just one slide each on the next vaccines. One is the hip vaccine. Again, in adults, there are only 2 indications. One is splenectomy, and the second is when the person is undergoing a bone marrow transplant. Splenectomy is just 1 dose, 14 days prior to the vaccine, to the procedure. if the person has not received a previous vaccination. Whereas in bone marrow transplant or stem cell transplant, irrespective of the previous vaccinations, you should be offering them 3 doses 4 weeks apart, starting 6 months from the transplant. Okay, now again we will go to one more case scenario. This is also an actual case scenario. One of my friend's daughter, I would say. A 15-year-old girl reports to you 6 months after taking the first dose of Gardasil, which is the HPV quadrivalent vaccine. And they forgot totally about the second dose and the third dose. So now they come back to you about the concern of what happened to the first dose. Should we redo the first dose or should we just go ahead with the second dose? So should we actually revaccinate the child with dose 1 or continue with the schedule since we missed the second dose? So that takes us to the particular vaccine, which is HPV vaccine. There are 2 types. One is quadrivalent and the other is bivalent, again based on the serotypes which are there. The difference between the two is that quadrivalent also helps in protecting against warts, whereas bivalent only helps protecting against cervical cancer. So it should be offered to all females up to 26 years of age. And in bivalent, you can even offer it to up to 45 years of age, but it will give you protection only against cervical cancer. Now, this is also offered to males, especially as a routine vaccine, but it should be only the quadrivalent. You cannot offer the bivalent to males. And it can protect them from, especially homosexuals, from anal cancer also, and from warts. Ideally, the vaccine should be given before the sexual activity commences. So in your API schedule, the vaccine is actually kept at around 10 to 12 years, even before the menstrual cycle start. That is the best time, or at least before the sexual activity commences. Still offer it to all ladies who are coming to you up to 26 years of age. Schedule is for bivalent, it is 0, 1 and 6. And for quadrivalent, it is 0, 2 and 6 for adults. No boosters are needed. Specific contraindication is hypersensitivity to yeast for Gardasil. Specifically, what you should note is that in spite of taking the vaccines, as I mentioned previously, no vaccine is 100% efficacious. So screening for cervical cancer should be continued irrespective of the HPV vaccination. Although this vaccine is one of those most efficacious vaccines, the efficacy is almost, we would say, above 90%, still specifically advise the patient that they should be screening for HPV irrespective of their vaccination schedule. And this is one vaccine where the vaccine dose need not be repeated even if the dose is missed. Most of the vaccines, what we can do is, I just put up this case because many times we will see these missed opportunities or missed vaccines in our clinic. So then again, we are confused. What do we do with the patient? Most vaccines, what you can do is when the patient comes to you with a missed dose, you just advocate give the second dose as scheduled. And preferably, if there is a third dose, maybe give a 4 to 6 weeks gap and give the third dose. That is one way, there are no specific studies to tell you this, but some expert opinions on the vaccine say like that. So if you miss a vaccine in anybody among all the vaccines, always give the second dose as the person comes to you. If there is a third dose, you can always advocate it after about 4 to 6 weeks. Just one slide on typhoid vaccine. There are 3 types. Again, the oral and the polysaccharide vaccine are these days more of outdated. We are only giving conjugate. Just like I mentioned about any conjugate vaccine, this vaccine is also quite expensive compared to the polysaccharide or the oral vaccine. But the oral and the polysaccharide vaccine give you only a 3 years immunogenicity, whereas the conjugate vaccine is as long as 10 years. We are waiting more studies. It is said that 2 doses can even give you lifelong protection. So this is one more vaccine which has come up in the API schedule in pediatrics, whereas adults, we can offer them if anybody wants protection. Typhoid being so common in India, and we see a lot of comorbidities related to typhoid. So if the person can afford it, offer them the conjugate vaccine. Especially for people who are traveling to endemic areas, it's worth giving the vaccine 2 weeks prior to travel. The only precaution that you need to take, especially when you give Typhoral, is when the patient should not be on antibiotics or antimalarials. For injectable, there is no particular contraindication. Okay, now we'll go to certain special scenarios. Few of them I did mention, like catch-up immunization, breastfeeding, I did tell you. I'm just going to talk about 2 scenarios. One is pregnancy and one is travel. Pregnancy, before pregnancy, I've been telling this again, but I'm just reiterating, MMR and varicella should be offered to all patients who are planning pregnancy. And postpartum also, you can give almost all the vaccines except maybe yellow fever vaccine. During pregnancy, this is the FOXI guidelines that I'm talking about, August 2020 guidelines. A primee should be offered the first dose of TT in second trimester, and the second dose should be offered as Tdap instead of TT. In multis, just one dose of Tdap between 27 to 38 weeks of pregnancy is all that is advised. If you want to give influenza vaccine, you can go ahead and give it any time during pregnancy, but it should be only the inactive vaccine. All the other vaccines also only as per indication. No other vaccines are advised. Now coming to travel vaccines, mostly again that we see is the Hajj or Umrah. Meningococcal is compulsory, and as I mentioned previously, the Saudi government specifically says that it has to be the quadrivalent vaccine. There is no other vaccine which you can offer. Other vaccines which you can recommend are Hep A, Hep B, influenza, and pneumococcal. A similar situation or similar scenario in India, which is Kumbh Mela, there are no mandatory vaccines from the government, but we can actually extrapolate the Hajj vaccines to the Kumbh Mela also. Especially what we can recommend is typhoid, Hep A, and influenza vaccine, looking at the crowd there. For people who are going or traveling to endemic countries or endemic areas, the 3 vaccines that are recommended are yellow fever, cholera, and JE. Just to give you a quick info, yellow fever is just again single dose. The problem with cholera vaccine is it gives a very short immunity. The immunity is only hardly for 6 months to 1 year. So even if you give 2 doses, still the immunity is starts waning after 6 months. So if I remember, we had an outbreak in Bangalore itself about maybe a year back, and we were not given cholera vaccines and all. So this is more of theoretical knowledge, I would say. JE vaccine is actually given by the government in certain endemic belts in North India. Again, there are 2 types, inactivated and live vaccine. This is just for some information. Okay, now we will come to the superhero of the year or the coming year. I think probably there's going to be more thoughts on this. I'd just like to tell that there is a difference between the immunity developed in COVID virus, or rather I would say any virus. That's why if you see, most of the viral vaccinations have a little, like say dengue or HIV, they're not able to develop it. One is of course the virus keeps mutating, that is one. Today or yesterday, I remember reading that there's a new strain of COVID virus which has come out in some country. So that being one reason why viral vaccines are difficult to administer and to develop immunity. The second reason is the immunogenicity for antivirals or for viral viruses are usually short lasting, unlike bacterial where the immunity is long lasting. And the problem with COVID virus is that the spike around it, along with the cell-mediated, antibodies, you also need cell-mediated immunity to create a vaccine. So that is why there is some difficulties in a lot of vaccines coming up. Some of them, they say 60% only effective and all that. Now, when I was looking at the the inventory of the vaccine, there are about 100 to 150 vaccines which are undergoing initial trials, phase 1, phase 2 and all, but of which 50 have almost reached, 50 plus have reached phase 2 and phase 3 trials. The difference between COVID vaccine and other vaccines is, apart from the time taken, if you remember the very first slide, which I said it's around 6 years to 20 years for a normal vaccine to come up. This has actually come up in say 6 months to 1 year. So apart from the normal technology that they use for vaccines, there are a lot of other technologies which are being tried. One of them is mRNA and the DNA, where the actual antigen itself is being given to the person. It's not actually the vaccine; it's the actual antigen which is being given to the person, and they will give it in a much smaller quantity, or they will put it into another virus and then give. That is called as the vector virus. So they use another virus. They use a chimpanzee adenovirus and all. Put the mRNA into that, or put the DNA of the COVID virus into that, and then inject it into the human body. So just like the previously I said, the vaccine, the virus will not be good enough to create or to develop the infection, but it will be good enough to create a little bit of antibody response in the person. Some other methods are nanoparticle, gene based. They're all coming up, so we don't know 6 months later how many more vaccines can come. So this is today morning's newspaper, which was a little bit, I would say, discouraging when they said that you have to wait for end of 2021 to get the vaccine in India. Last week, I'm sure all of you would have got a call from BBMP and we would have given our details. So I was expecting that we will get the vaccine probably this month end or maybe next month beginning. And these were the vaccines which they mentioned are available in India or as of now being given, but which of them is going to come to us is also a big secret. I tried calling up few healthcare workers or BBMP people to understand which of them are going to come. They themselves say they don't know. But these are the 4 which could come to us in the next few months. So these are the ones which are being developed in India with chances of coming to us. The most I would say chance high is for Covishield, which is the Oxford vaccine, or Covaxin, which is the Bharat Biotech. Sputnik is also in the race quite. The problem with Sputnik is that it requires a little more stringent storage, whereas the one which Zydus is coming out, which is actually in phase 2 trials, they say you can even store it at room temperature. You don't even need 2 to 8 degrees. The other vaccines can be stored at 2 to 8 degrees, which is just like your normal vaccines. So the only problem is in the Sputnik vaccine, which needs a little more stringent storage control. The other few vaccines which are not available in India but are already being used now in US and UK. I think all of you know about the Pfizer vaccine, which requires again a stringent storage condition, but extremely efficacious as claimed by them. Few of my friends in UK and US have already received it, so hoping we'll get some information from them as to how it is doing for the next few months. China has also started using this vaccine, and this vaccine is also available in certain UAE countries, also in UAE and some countries in the Gulf. This vaccine has been given to the healthcare workers initially. So before about the COVID vaccine, again, I think the first chances of healthcare workers, people above 50 or 60, and probably people with medical comorbidities who might receive the vaccine first, only followed by the general population. We are just waiting. There's one guidelines which came out yesterday or day before from the ICMR. What I have taken here is also from the ICMR website and the BMJ article. So I think that finishes my talk. So I hope I was able to kind of put together all your confusions. Adult vaccine is crucial, but often neglected by us physicians and patients, I will say. The indications and the schedules will vary according to many factors, and it has to be tailored in different case scenarios. The 2 guidelines which we can go through is ACIP-CDC, ACIP-CDC, and the API recommendations. Always make a shared decision with the patient. Hopefully, we will get the COVID vaccine soon. So I leave you with this sentence by Kristen Bernard, who said, I have saved about 150 lives by heart transplant. But if I had focused on preventive medicine earlier, I would have saved more than 150 million lives. So I think all of us as doctors should start thinking of preventive medicine and advise adult vaccines for all the patients who come to our clinic. Thank you very much for patiently listening. I'd really welcome any questions, comments, or concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Swapna, for the wonderful presentation. Of course, a very exhaustive presentation. I'm sure we have a lot of participants with a lot of doubts, and just a kind request, if any of you have any questions, apart from what Dr. Swapna has explained, please put it in the chat box or raise your hands so that we can discuss. So otherwise, as a routine, we'll go back and see what questions we can take up. We already discussed about the vaccination link and the results. Now,
yeah, I can see some questions, Soumya. I'll take it up.
Yeah.
Is fitness immunoglobulin available? Yes, it is available. I have not given it because in the clinic I don't give, but you can give it in hospitals. It is available. It has to be given in and around the site, just like one vaccine which I didn't cover is rabies vaccine, because I think it is just a topic on its own, rabies vaccine. So I have not touched upon that at all. It has to be another half-an-hour session.
And around what time should influenza vaccine be recommended? I think you have discussed already what time it needs to be given.
Yeah,
and
I think the person wants to know, probably see there are two vaccines, Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere. We recommend the Northern Hemisphere vaccine, and usually the time the new strain comes is sometime in September, October. So that is the time usually we get the new strain of the vaccine in the year. So always look when the new set of vaccine has come and advise it. And mostly it happens around September, October. That is the time.
Okay. And yeah, this session is definitely available in our Facebook and YouTube AFPI Karnataka chapter. So some of you who have missed this can definitely get into those links. And of course, you can do a repeat revision because the doses and the number of vaccines are complicated. Dr. Sanjay wanted to know if any consent is needed or any protocol to be followed before COVID vaccination. I think yes, we because it is under the category of emergency usage. I think we need to take a risk consent, safer to take a risk consent. What do you say, Dr. Swapna?
Did he mean only COVID or was it for all vaccines that he asked? Sorry, I
I
missed.
think they are more interested
COVID.
COVID.
Okay, right, yeah.
COVID.
We're still waiting for the complete guidelines from the government side. But I think I don't think there is any consent form as such which has come. But explaining for, I would say not just for COVID vaccine, for every vaccine, explaining that one thing is efficacy, number of dosages, time for seroconversion, so that people don't have this false belief that I'm vaccinated now and I'm going to be not getting the infection. So that should never come in people's mind for any vaccine for that matter, especially for COVID. So telling them about the universal precautions is still very, very important. How many of vaccines you give. And the seroconversion starts only after the second dose of the vaccine. So again, tell them one dose is not enough. Only after the second dose of vaccine, 2 weeks later only, you are going to be fairly good immunity levels are going to come. Consent wise, I am not aware in the sense of any specific consent for COVID vaccine.
Ma'am, actually, just to pitch in, like how for use of remdesivir, you have a designed consent form. Similarly, I think even for COVID vaccine, there will be a design consent form, and it is wiser to have a consent form, especially when you use such newer vaccines as an emergency usage. Just my thought, because it does protect you in case of any adverse event, especially if it is individualized adverse event, it does give you a lot of security as well. There is one more question on
so I can just,
influenza
one
vaccine.
person has privately messaged me whether as a healthcare worker who has taken hepatitis B full course, how to decide regarding booster as they haven't checked the anti-HBs levels 2 to 3 months after vaccination. I think you should go for the anti-HBs levels. That is the best way to find out. Especially being healthcare workers, again, we should not be under the false pretext that we are vaccinated and we are healthy. We should always do especially for hepatitis B, I would say. So thank you for asking that question, but I think it is still important that we should do it.
Dr. Kritika is requesting you to again clarify when to use PCV 13 and PPSV 23 in diabetic adults. I think already you have highlighted. Would you want
I know it is a
to
very
repeat?
confusing vaccine.
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
go to the CDC WHO website, you really feel it is so confusing as to what is given first, what to be given second, and all that. What I would suggest is just offer PCV 13 if the person can afford, irrespective of the age, irrespective of the comorbidities, because it's not a live vaccine. So you can still offer it to anybody. If the person cannot afford a PCV 13, offer them the PPSV, but the PPSV will take much time. It's a weaker immunogenicity and also a little more time taking also. So if they can afford PCV 13, offer that, followed by a PPSV vaccine after 8 weeks. After 8 weeks, you can give the next vaccine and be done with it for anybody below 65 years. If the person is above 65 years, just one PPSV is all that you need to give. There is no need to give PCV vaccine according to CDC. But Indian guidelines still say you can still offer them a PCV 13. So PCV 13 is something which you can just offer irrespective of the age and the comorbidities if the person can afford it. And then 8 weeks later, give a PPSV. And if suppose you've given the person a vaccine below 65 years, always make sure after 65 years or after 5 years of receiving the previous dose, one more dose of PPSV is offered to them. So that should be very clear. After 65 or 5 years after the previous dose of the vaccine, one more dose of PPSV, that is only PPSV, should be offered to them. So I hope I've made it a little bit more clear now for Kritika.
Yeah. And many of them want your presentation to be shared. I think we can share it in the national group and the think tank group as well. Probably they'll keep it for life.
No, things will change. Vaccines are so dynamic. You just cannot predict what happens after 1 year.
Yeah. At least for this year, it stands good. Okay. And Dr. Sai has a question. If patient is having antibodies after any of these infection, do you vaccinate the patient?
Actually, not needed. But again,
Depends
we
on
don't do antibody levels for all the vaccines. No, we do only see. For example, if you remember, I had told about a boy who had come with for a vaccine completion certificate. So his mother is not very sure about the vaccines given to him. So what I did for that boy was did the antibody levels for each of them, and then I got the antibody levels so that we can show them that this boy is actually vaccinated. So for those where the antibody levels were less than normal or were not detected, I offered them the vaccine. So I had to give him 2 or 3 vaccines, which the other vaccines he had already received till 5 years. So they were good antibody levels, so we need not offer. But it's little practically, financially very taxing because each antibody levels usually are extremely expensive to do the antibody levels. But
yes.
still,
And which lab did you opt for?
If I remember, it was Central Lab or
because there are very few labs which can do that.
If I remember, it was Central Lab, I think. Central or Manipal one. Manipal has done it for me. This patient, Manipal did. So sometimes they subsource it or whatever way they will give it to you. So if you send it to one of the corporate hospitals, I think most of them will either do it or...
Madam?
I request all the participants to mute their mic because we do not want any unnecessary disturbances. Dr. Nrutya has a question. There are many kids who have relocated to India and they have not received BCG vaccination. Do they need BCG vaccination?
Actually, BCG vaccination is not indicated in adults. So I think after coming back, if they're in the childhood, you can still offer them because API guidelines, I think up to 10 years or so, they say we can offer. But maybe the problem with BCG vaccine is the older you are, the less chances of it offering any protection. First of all, it doesn't offer protection against TB. It only offers protection against complicated TB. So BCG vaccine is not just to prevent TB, it is only to prevent complications of TB. So the efficacy of the vaccine is very, very less. It's hardly, I think, 60%. Soumya is also an expert. You can also pitch in. So the more you're delayed, the lesser efficacy of the vaccine. So if you offer it in, that is why there is no need to give adults the BCG vaccine. So in adults, it is not indicated. But if the child comes, Soumya, what is your take? Because you're also an expert in TB.
No, I'm just learning from TB. So let me put it that way. I think it does protect only against miliary TB. So early vaccination is what is more beneficial, but depends on the age in which the child comes to India with a huge burden of TB. I would not hesitate to vaccinate the child with BCG. Considering the age, suppose a child comes, a young adult comes at the age of 13 or 14 years to India, then we cannot recommend BCG vaccination. The same, if a 2 or a 3-year-old comes from a different country to India, BCG vaccination can be offered. I think I will also clarify with some experts because I think this is which I have read long time back and also had clarity on this. There's another question, how to decide regarding booster as they didn't check antibody levels 2 to 3 months after vaccination for hepatitis B, I guess. The question is for hepatitis.
That's what I just answered. I think Dr. Swati first sent it to me and then she sent it in the common group. Okay.
There's a comment by Dr. Uma. She says ICMR guideline requires consent for any drug or vaccine if approval is for emergency use. That's what we were discussing. Dr. Shalini Gupta says a patient with rubella positive planning pregnancy, previous MMR status not known. What's your comment for MMR for adolescents?
Okay. Ideally, we can do the rubella antibodies. If antibodies are positive, then the patient can go ahead with normal pregnancy. Preferably, if you can't get the antibodies, it's still better to advise one more vaccine pre-pregnancy. because as I told previously, there are no clear-cut guidelines on what happens when you revaccinate unnecessarily. So that is one question. If we revaccinate somebody with a vaccine which is not needed, what is going to happen? That is one thing. So since vaccines don't have that many of anaphylaxis and all which is known, it's still worth taking a small risk and giving one MMR. If the person is very sure that she's been rubella positive previously, there's no need actually for rubella vaccine because they will be probably having good antibodies. Other option is to check the antibodies and see, which is the best option, I would say, among the lot.
Dr. Apurva is asking, is bivalent HPV vaccine advisable for males beyond 26 years? I
No,
think
bivalent is
very
not
clear it is
for-
not
not
recommended.
advisable for males at all. If you're giving to males, it has to be only quadrivalent.
Yes. And Dr. Uma has made a comment. Government agencies may not take consent, but individual practices do not have the protection government agencies have. Yeah, that is true. And it is wiser to always take a consent. You can design a consent form, take it and be safe.
You can even
Um,
self-design one consent. It's
that's
not
what.
the
Probably
UN
we can all design a consent form for AFPI practicing physicians regarding COVID vaccine. That will be a good exercise to start with. I think for COVID vaccine, government will have its own consent form. Probably for the other vaccines as general, especially for adult vaccine, we can.
COVID vaccine is one thing which government is going to give us free of all vaccines. I don't think any other vaccine the government has given free. Hopefully we will get it free for adults.
Dr. Swati has a question. For adults who have had recurrent herpes zoster, should zoster vaccine be given?
Yeah, irrespective of the previous zoster history, actually zoster vaccine is recommended for everybody above 65. I forgot if I did mention it during in the slide.
No, you have put a note on it. I have seen that.
Irrespective of the previous vaccination, you should be giving. But unfortunately, because of the cost factor, again, it is extremely expensive, and because of the stringent, the way has to be handled, the cold chain, it is not a very popular vaccine in India. What I know from my friends abroad is it's a very popular vaccine abroad because it's given by the government. Whereas in India, we usually don't give, and most of us would have varicella vaccine if they have given. That is also again another gray zone whether the person who's taken varicella vaccine is actually protected from zoster, to what extent, and to how many years, we still don't know. So that's still something which has to be, probably have to wait for more information on that.
But Swati has a comment. How many years antibody levels are maintained more than 10 after hepatitis B vaccination? Is there any decrease in the antibody level after 10 years?
Usually no. If you do your antibody levels and it is above 10, it is taken as lifelong. So there's no booster actually recommended. Only once you can do it, and if you feel it is low, only then the second course of vaccine. So people who are non-responders need to be checking. People who have actually responded once need not be checking. There is no studies to say that the immunity wanes on time. So as of now, there's no data on that. I hope I'm clear there.
Yeah. Can hepatitis B vaccine be stored at room temperature or stored in refrigerator less than 8 degrees Celsius? Dr. Shan.
Almost all the vaccines have to be stored in the fridge between 2 to 8 degrees only. Nothing should be. No other vaccine should be freezed. Zoster vaccine can also go to lower temperatures. Only those two vaccines will be kept in lower temperatures. All the others will be 2 to 8 degrees. And after taking out from the fridge for any vaccine, maximum storage time in ideal conditions will be half an hour. So within half an hour, you should administer the vaccine and should not be exposed to heat sources. So there are, I think there is actually, if I need to talk on vaccine storage itself, I'll have to give another talk, or where it has to be stored in the fridge. All those are again points which we should be looking into. Mostly remember that we should not expose it to heat source, and it should be given at the earliest, maximum within half an hour. This is what I remember somewhere reading. There is no guidelines, but it is some recommendation.
Ma'am, for youngsters, could you recommend what all the things they need to keep in their clinic before they start any vaccination? Just a recap.
I think just like any other injections, nothing else. Adrenaline and Avil and probably hydrocortisone. These are the three things you'll have to just keep off. Anaphylactic reactions are very less as far as vaccines are concerned. And most importantly, communicate with the patient what they can expect after the vaccine, like some local soreness, some feeling of numbness, or a little bit of redness. These can happen, and not to be worried about what they need to be worried about, like GBS kind of symptoms, or arthus kind of reactions, vasculitic reactions. Those are the things you should be telling them, advising. But just like any injection, all you need to do is understand that you need to take care of any anaphylactic reaction which happens for the first 15 minutes. If anybody has any more thoughts on this, please, I'll be happy to hear that.
I think at least an Ambu bag is a must in your clinics. Safer to keep that one as well. In case of any adverse event, you can at least manage with Ambu. And of course, we should have some training in BLS and ACLS. There's another question which has come up. Is oral polio still given? What is the storage temperature and what is the shelf life?
Okay. Since my talk is only on adult vaccination, it is just a no. Oral polio is still given in pediatrics, I think, in some, although IPV has taken over now, and oral polio is given in pulse polio. So that is the main indication now for oral polio. Pulse polio still takes oral polio. Storage is still in freezer only. Again, take it out and keep it in the cold storage, cold chain properly. Proper cold chain should be maintained. Shelf life of oral polio, I am not very sure. Either it should have a VVM or it should have a date written on the vial. That is what I remember. I used to give oral polio in my clinic, and the vial used to have an expiry date on it. So that is the shelf life. So it's vial to vial. I'd be really happy if anybody who knows more than what I say. As I said, I'm not an expert in this. I'd really welcome any inputs from any senior or even juniors who are here who know, more than what I'm pitching in. Okay. I think there is one more comment which has come up. For vaccine where protection is through antibodies, that is humoral protection, drop in antibody titer is expected with time as the plasma cell numbers drop, whereas B cell memory will lead to an increase in antibody levels upon exposure. Antibody testing several years after vaccination is less useful than after completion of a recent vaccine. Point well taken, Dr. Uma. Yeah, you're right. In fact, that's why I said if you start you have to think of humoral immunity. Again, in viruses, again, the spike protein, what is there, how much of, which is the spike protein, what is the vaccine developed against. So recently I attended a 1 hour talk on only COVID vaccine by Dr. John Jacob in Vellore. He spoke just 1 hour on COVID vaccine. They're extremely enlightening. So if you all have a chance, you can just log into IMA Trivandrum website, and this talk by Dr. John Jacob is there. It was extremely, extremely enlightening. So each of these vaccines, I think we can sit and talk for half an hour or so.
Okay, if there are no more questions, over to Dr. Jyotika. Dr. Swapna, everybody is happy. Today we had over 95 participants, and definitely Dr. Joe can pitch in and add a lot more about the experiences which we can share in this session. Over to Dr. Jyotika.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Dr. Soumya. Dr. Swapna, that was a really, really beautiful session. And yeah, all of us have benefited, no doubt about that. I would like to thank you for taking your time. This is the second time you're presenting the same topic. I mean, it's great. I know it's an important topic, and I think we will still trouble you for more such advices, suggestions, and guidance. And thank you to each one of the participants who's joined us today. We have participants even from other states, from Kerala, from West Bengal, from Delhi. So we've had participants from all over. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Dr. Soumya, for being such a wonderful moderator as always. And finally, we will be uploading this session on, it's already available on Facebook. And shortly, we will also upload the video on YouTube. So it'll be there for referral forever. Thank you for joining.
We welcome any feedback also. You can put it up in.
Yes, it can be, you can put it up on our groups, or you can also put it up on our FB page. And please do subscribe to our YouTube channel as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Jyotika, for arranging everything. It was just decided on huge demand within 44 days period. And thank you, Dr. Swapna, for repeating it without any signs of exhaustion. As charming as you were, the talk was also the same. So thank you, Dr. Jyotika and Dr. Swapna.
Thank you all. Please.
Thank you all.
Right. Take care.